Hello and welcome back to the course on blockchain. And today we're going to continue our discussion of soft and hard forks. Alright, so previously we left off here where we talked about the real life examples of soft and hard forks in the Ethereum and Bitcoin chains. So just to quickly recap, we saw that on the 20th of July 2016 there was a hard fork in the Ethereum chain because of the attack on the DAO, and Ethereum wanted to revert the transactions in that attack, and those miners who agreed continued with Ethereum. Those miners who disagreed continued with Ethereum Classic. In Bitcoin, on 20th of July 2017, there was a soft fork associated with acceptance of SegWit. On 1st of August 2017, there was a hard fork which was caused by some miners being unhappy with the block size limit of 1 megabyte, and they decided to increase the block size limit to 8 megabytes, and therefore they split off into their own chain, which is now called Bitcoin Cash. Bitcoin continued here, and then on 24th October 2017, there were some miners who were unhappy with the ASIC mining devices because they were too powerful, and these miners wanted to go back to mining with GPUs, and that's why there was another fork and hard fork, and this new chain is now known as Bitcoin Gold, and Bitcoin continued here as well. So that's the real life examples of soft and hard forks. Now let's go to the theory. What is the difference between a soft and hard fork, and what exactly do they do to the underlying software? So let's have a look. So this is the rule of thumb, that hard forks, they loosen up rules, and soft forks, they tighten up rules. It might sound a bit counterintuitive, like you might think that it's, soft loosen, hard tighten, but it is what it is. We'll discuss a little bit later why the name might be, what the name might have been chosen as such. But in general, just remember, this is a rule of thumb, that hard forks, they loosen up the rules, soft forks, they tighten up the rules. Even if the way to remember it is that the definition is the counterintuitive definition. All right, so now let's look at an example. We're going to look at an example here. We've got some placeholders where our blockchain will be demonstrated, and it's coming from the left, and then at some point this red line illustrates where the fork actually happened. We're going to start with a hard fork, and a great example of a hard fork is first I wanted to mention that in our placeholders we're going to have two rows. The top row is for miners who haven't upgraded to the new rules, and the bottom row is for miners who have upgraded to the new rules. And so our blockchain will either be on the top or on the bottom. And the good example to start off with is the maximum block size increasing. Well, this is indeed an example of a hard fork, as we know, because that happened in real life. There was Bitcoin, and then there's Bitcoin Cash. That's exactly what happened. Bitcoin has a block size of 1 megabyte. Bitcoin Cash has a maximum block size of 8 megabytes. So in both cases, a maximum size of block 1 megabyte, maximum size of block 8 megabytes. And why is it a hard fork? Because, as we discussed, hard forks, they tighten up hard forks, they loosen up the rules. I'm already getting confused. So hard forks, they loosen up the rules, and therefore in Bitcoin you can only have up to 1 megabyte. Now in Bitcoin Cash, you have a broader range. You can go all the way up to 8 megabytes. So the rules have been loosened up. And so let's have a look at how a hard fork might play out. So before the software is updated, everybody's on the same chain. So over here, everybody's together, and then the software is updated, and then this happens. Some decide to stay with the old rules, some decide to take the new rules. And let's say that this first block after the upgrade, is actually found by a miner who is sitting in this group, a miner who decided not to upgrade. And then this block is going to be under 1 megabyte. Let's say it's 0.7 megabytes. And if this is the only change to the rules of the network for Bitcoin Cash, so if this is the only change, we're looking at a very trivial example, that this is indeed the only change that occurred, the maximum block size increased. Well, This block of 0.7 megabytes, it follows the rules of the old network, correct, because this is 1 megabyte limit, and it follows the rules of the new network, correct, because this is 8 megabytes limit. So this block will be accepted by everybody in the total network of Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash, or all of these miners will accept this block because it follows everybody's rules. Great. Then let's say the next block is also found by miners in this group, a miner in that group. Again, 0.9 megabyte. This block follows rules of the Bitcoin network and the Bitcoin Cash network. It follows everybody's rules, so it's going to be accepted by everybody. Again, no conflict there. But then let's say the next block is accepted or is found by a miner who is in this group, who has upgraded their software. And let's say this block is indeed 8 megabytes in size. Then what happens here is that this block is now indeed it follows the rules of the new network of Bitcoin Cash, correct, because 8 megabytes is in the limit of 8 megabytes. However, 8 megabytes is way more than 1 megabyte, and it doesn't follow the rules of the Bitcoin network, of the old network. So what that means is that the miners that haven't upgraded to the new rules, they will reject this block. They will not accept it into their chain. They will look at it and they'll say this block is invalid, and they'll continue mining, and eventually they'll find their own block, which will be 1 megabyte, for example. And this block will follow the rules of, as you can see, the Bitcoin network. And so this is where the split happens. As soon as this situation occurs, where something in the new rules, which are broader, which are looser, is found and it doesn't fit in with the old network, then there's a split, and so Bitcoin Cash will continue mining its own chain, and Bitcoin will continue mining its own chain. And so, as you can see, what that means is that a hard fork, and why it's called a hard fork, is because it's not backwards compatible. So as soon as something is found in this new chain, Bitcoin Cash for instance, it will not be accepted. So and a block found by miners who have upgraded will generally never be accepted by the miners who haven't upgraded. And that's why as soon as a block like this comes first, then there's a split in the chain, and that's it. And then from then on forever, there's going to be separate chains. They will never come back together, simply because it's not backwards compatible. And that's why it's called a hard fork, because it's like a hard change. It doesn't allow for the chains to come back together. It doesn't allow for the miners from the old network to accept those blocks as well. There we go. So that's a hard fork. Now let's have a look at a soft fork. Soft fork example. Again, here we're going to have haven't upgraded on the top and have upgraded. And so as you can see, the names are a bit different. So here's haven't upgraded yet and have already upgraded. And that shows that eventually in a soft fork, all miners will be forced to upgrade eventually. So in a soft fork, you generally don't have a split of the network, a split of the chains. This is just going to be one chain, and eventually all miners will go here. But what this word means here, majority, it means that a soft fork will only actually happen, will only be initiated by the network when the majority agrees in advance to that soft fork. So in Bitcoin, Litecoin, in different networks, the rules are different, and that majority is a different percentage. So like this will be initiated only when a certain percentage of the miners agree to it, and is just a number above 50%. And again, it depends on the network what it can be, and the situation as well. So what we're going to look at is a soft fork, an example of when the maximum block size is decreased. We don't have a real life example of that, so we're going to make one up. We're going to say that in the Bitcoin network it was 1 megabyte. In the new network, in Bitcoin, again, it's the same network. The thing here is that they're not going to actually split, the chain's not going to split. So the new rules, that's what we're going to say. The new rules are that the maximum block size is half a megabyte, 0.5 megabytes. And Yeah, and so why is this a soft fork? Well, we know that the rules in a soft fork are tightened up, and as we can see, they are indeed tightened up. So here we have a maximum block size of 1 megabyte, and now we have a smaller range. We can only go up to 0.5 megabytes, so it's constricting us more, and therefore the rules are tightening up, and so it's a soft fork. And so let's have a look. The network is here, so it continues. So the chain comes up to here. Then the rules are changed because we have the majority who agreed to change the rules. And from here, what happens? Well, let's say that even though the majority is here, let's say that the first block is actually found by a miner from this group. It could totally happen, right? Because mining blocks is kind of like a lottery. And therefore it totally can happen that the first block here is found by a miner from this group. And let's say this block is in size, it is only 0.4 megabytes. Again, that could also happen because blocks, the size of the limits here we can see here are the maximum limit. So a block could totally be like 0.4 megabytes. And so let's, what happens here? Let's check the rules. So 0.4 megabytes does conform to the old rules, yes, so it's accepted by these miners, good. And 0.4 megabytes also conforms to the new rules. It's less than half a megabyte, great. So it's also accepted by these miners, amazing, everything's fantastic. All right, so there's no conflict there. Then what happens? Let's say the next block is again found by a miner from this group. Again, that could happen as well. But this time the block is 0.9 megabytes. And so now if we check the rules, we'll see that 0.9 megabytes does conform to the new rule, to the old rules, check. So it's accepted by these miners, great. However, 0.9 megabytes doesn't conform to the new rules, which are 0.5 megabytes. The 0.9 is greater than the new limit. And therefore, it's not accepted by the miners who have upgraded. So what's going to happen is they're going to see this block, they're going to reject it as not valid, and therefore they're just going to continue mining, and eventually they'll find their own block, which might be like 0.5 megabytes. And now this is where the interesting part happens. So now we kind of have like a chain split, right? So, okay, it looks very similar to what happens in a hard fork. Looks like we're about to have a chain split, and these two chains are going to go their separate ways. However, this is the interesting part. So because we have the majority of miners here, right? The soft fork will only be initiated when we have not just majority, but like a prevailing majority, like 75% or 95%, like a lot of miners sitting in this network. Then what will, on this side, what will happen is these miners are going to find the next block, likely they're going to find the next block faster. And so we'll have a situation like this because there's more of them here, and we'll have a new block here. And what that means is this block, this is the key, that this block is 0.5 megabytes, and it follows the rules of the new network, and it follows the rules of the old network as well. So that is where the backwards compatibility of a soft fork comes in. A soft fork is backwards compatible, unlike a hard fork. So what that means is that these blocks found by new miners, they will be accepted by the new miners and by the old miners. And so these miners, they just see a chain like this, great. And what these miners see, they see an orphan block situation. They see a chain kind of split. So they see, okay, 0.9 megabytes, but they also see this chain. They accept these blocks as valid. And so because they see this chain, they see that this is the longer chain, and it does conform to their rules. So they will reject this block. It will become an orphan block, and they will continue with this chain, even the miners that haven't upgraded, simply because the new rules are stricter and tighter, and therefore they still conform to the old rules. And so even if this doesn't happen like right away, even if you have like 1-1 and then you have another 1-1, 1-1, eventually, because there's more miners here, eventually this chain will be longer. Eventually the blue chain over here will be longer, and eventually this other chain will be rejected. And so the new miners will always win because their blocks are accepted by both the new and the old rules. The old miners will always lose because their blocks are not accepted by the new rules, and there's less of them, less of the miners. And so from there it'll continue, and again, eventually it's like, for instance, here, maybe a miner from this group might find the next block. Great. And it might be compatible to both rules. Great again. So it'll be accepted, but then eventually the next block might be found by miners from this group, and so on. And so in this case, because of situations like this, because of situations where there's a chain split and then it turns into an orphan block situation and the miners continue this way, miners here are going to be at a disadvantage. They are more likely to find blocks that are going to be rejected, that are going to become orphan blocks. And that forces them to move to this group. That forces them to accept the new rules and to play by the new rules. That gives them the incentive to do that. Because otherwise they're going to be spending a lot of time and electricity mining blocks, which are going to become invalid, and they're not going to be getting their reward. So that's how a soft fork works, very tricky like that. And the key here is backwards compatibility. And that's why it's called a soft fork, because it's not a hard change in the rules, it's a soft change in the rules, because it makes rules tighter, it means that it's a soft change in the sense that the new rules are still compatible, are still compatible with the old rules. So the new rules are a kind of like a subgroup of the old rules. And that's why it's called a soft fork, because that ensures backwards compatibility. And that allows for this kind of like game scenario, like a competition scenario where these guys will always win, and that forces the ones that haven't upgraded to move to the majority. And so, for instance, that's how SegWit was accepted in the Bitcoin network. All right, so there we go. That's how soft fork works. I know this, especially this soft fork business, might be a bit complicated. In that case, there's great additional reading which I've got for you. It's called Complete Guide on Bitcoin and Blockchain Forks by Khalil Kazi, and it explains this whole situation with a great analogy of a restaurant that's cooking vegetarian food, and then they decide to introduce meat, and that represents a hard fork, or they decide to switch to only vegan recipes, and that represents a soft fork. And it's a great analogy which can help you further understand this topic if you'd like to get a better grasp of it. But in general, that's how soft and hard forks work. Hope you enjoyed today's tutorial, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Until then, enjoy blockchains.